Welcome to the channel. It was a phugoid, an oscillatory cycle the plane entered due to a lack of stabilization. It was nearly impossible to control. That disaster became a national tragedy for Japan and led to enormous grief. That thick, humid summer air hung heavy, the kind that made the horizon seem to tremble. Tokyo was bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. The city breathed steadily, humming with millions of footsteps, the click of heels, the rumble of cars. And amidst this endless stream of lives, among office workers hurrying home, among families bustling with suitcases, a metallic behemoth pushed through, a massive Boeing 747, preparing for its fifth flight of the day. Just a number, yet it would soon become a symbol of pain, terror, and endless human suffering, though no one, absolutely no one at that moment, knew how cursed this flight would become. People in the terminal hurried, jostled, held children's hands, laughed, talked, argued. It was an ordinary Monday. Utterly ordinary. And therein lay the tragedy, for nothing, not a single feeling, not a single omen, not a single sign, warned of the approaching darkness. Captain Masami Takahama, a man with graying temples and a calm gaze, stood slightly to the side, watching as his co-pilot, Yutaka Sasaki, went through the pre-flight checks. Young, but already experienced, he made sure to keep every step under control. Nearby sat the flight engineer, Hiroshi Fukuda, focused, attentive, as if he could read every vibration of the plane with his gaze. They were a team. Cohesive. Reliable. And not one of them could have imagined how quickly that confidence would turn into despair. Systems check complete, Sasaki clipped out. Excellent. We're taking off on schedule. The captain nodded. Well, almost on schedule. The delay was only a few minutes. In the world of aviation, a trifle. In the cabin, a small universe buzzed with life. This universe consisted of 524 people. Some were returning home for Obon, the most family-oriented holiday of the year. Others were flying for business. Children laughed, played. Someone was photographing the sunset clouds. One woman touched up her makeup. A man in a suit tried to finish a report, typing away on a portable word processor. An old man by the window watched the sunset so intently, as if seeing it for the last time, though, of course, he didn't know that. The flight attendants, friendly, calm, gently directed passengers. Please move further back. Your bag fits up top, allow me to help. There was no anxiety in their eyes. They were used to these people, these sounds, these bustling conversations. And why would they be anxious? The plane had been flying for decades, thousands of flights behind it. It was a true workhorse of the sky. The engines roared so loudly that the vibration echoed throughout the entire airport. The control tower windows rattled. A toddler by the window gasped, covering their ears with their hands. The plane surged forward, like a huge beast impatient with the ground. And then, the wheels lifted off. The world beneath them began to shrink. A little more, and the city transformed into a shimmering map, cut by lines of roads and rivers. In the cockpit, calm. In the cabin, quiet delight. On the wings, confidence. The Boeing ascended quickly, effortlessly, majestically. Outside, the clouds parted, revealing a horizon bathed in gold. Drinks began to be served in the cabin. Some had already drifted off to sleep, the Monday fatigue making itself known. The captain smiled faintly, everything was going perfectly. Climbing to flight level 240, the engineer reported. All right. We'll smoothly transition onto our route, Takahama said. And then, 24,000 feet. A level horizon line. Stable engine thrust. Calm. But this calm was deceptive. So deceptive, it made you want to grab it with your hands and shake it, forcing it to warn everyone, beware. Trouble is near. It happened in a single, solitary instant. An instant, and everything fell apart. From the rear came such an explosive roar, as if the plane had been struck by lightning hundreds of times in a row. The ceiling in the tail section shuddered. An entire panel segment fell out. The cabin was flooded with white, a flash. Moisture instantly turned into fog. Screams. Dozens. Hundreds. One solid chorus of terror. Oxygen masks rained down from the ceiling, hitting people in the face. Children shrieked. Someone lost consciousness from the sudden drop in pressure. Someone frantically tried to buckle in a child who was crying so desperately that the sound was piercing. The plane lurched so violently that bags flew through the aisles like projectiles. Decompression. Immediate descent. Check the elevator. The elevator's unresponsive. Their voices began to intertwine, loud, bewildered, yet still professional. But the elevator truly was unresponsive. Completely unresponsive. As if the entire tail section of the plane had vanished. The captain slammed the panel. Again. And again. It was as if he wanted to force the machine to obey through sheer willpower. Hydraulics. 0. All 4 of them. No way. But it was true. They'd lost control. Completely. But no one yet understood just how fatal that loss was. The plane suddenly plunged nose first. Passengers screamed as if the sky had ripped open above them. Drinks went flying against the walls. A flight attendant slammed into the ceiling and crumpled to the floor, unconscious. People clawed for their masks, for their seatbelts, for a neighbor's hand, for air, for dear life. And amidst this chaos, a man sat by the window, staring at the mountains below, his lips barely moving as he whispered. "I'm not ready." He closed his eyes. The plane plunged thousands of feet, the air roaring like a wild beast. Then, on its own, without anyone's command, it began to climb. So abruptly the engines groaned under the strain. Then another plunge. And another climb. And again, and again, and again. This was a phugoid, an oscillatory cycle the plane had entered due to a lack of stabilization. Controlling it was almost impossible. But the crew fought on. Clinging to hope until the very last, hope that was melting away with every passing second. They hadn't put on their oxygen masks. It was a mistake. Hypoxia was creeping in. Draining their clarity second by second. The captain's eye began to twitch. Sasaki's hand slipped from the controls for a moment, he caught himself, but his mind was already swimming. Fukuda shook his head, as if trying to clear the fog. He yelled. "Keep going. We can still level it out." But his voice was hoarse, desperate, as if he were pleading with the very machine for help. And above all this, one sound resonated. A single, solitary sound. Sharp, relentless, cold. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. The automated warning voice lashed their ears like a whip. The plane was plummeting again. Again it tried to level out. Again it plunged. And beneath them now were mountains. Jagged. Stony. Merciless. They fought for 32 minutes. 32 minutes. It was unthinkable. Most planes would have crashed within 3 minutes of such a catastrophe, but this one, it held on. It clung to the sky like a wounded beast refusing to die. But fate had long since sealed this flight's destiny. A black, bold, relentless mark. The mountains around them loomed ever higher. The automatics screamed. Passengers prayed. Someone called for their mom. Someone said their goodbyes. Someone just screamed, trying to drown out everything else. The captain rasped. Hold on. The world beneath the airliner's wings trembled, as though cloaked in shadow. It seemed as if reality itself began to vibrate under the weight of the forces that had descended upon the pilots, and everyone in the cabin, trying to understand why the noise had become so strange, why the air suddenly smelled of hot metal, why their hearts were beating faster than they should. No one knew yet. The plane was now living a life of its own, an uncontrollable one. Captain Masami Takahama stared straight ahead, and for the first time, a clear, almost palpable bewilderment appeared in his eyes. He was a man unaccustomed to fear, having seen everything there was to see during tens of thousands of hours in the air, but what was happening now defied logic. The controls responded sluggishly or didn't respond at all. The plane pitched its nose up, then sharply dropped it, like a colossal beast trying to buck off an invisible rider. Navigator Fukuda frantically scanned the panels, but they were telling him nothing. No standard errors, no hint of a mundane malfunction. Just an anomalous emptiness. As if the system had decided to guard its secret as stubbornly as the surrounding mountains guarded their misty peaks. All 4 hydraulic systems, 0 pressure, he mumbled, but his words sounded like an impossible incantation. This just doesn't happen. It can't be. 0. The captain spun around sharply. How can it be 0? System completely lost. All lines, dead. It was tantamount to a death sentence. At 24,000 feet in the sky, the enormous Boeing 747 was transforming into a steel hulk, without nerves, without muscles, without control. Yet still, they tried. They couldn't do otherwise. They were people entrusted with hundreds of lives. The plane trembled more and more violently. Gusts of wind, almost imperceptible before, now slammed into the wings so hard that every passenger felt as if their shopping cart wheel wasn't rolling on a smooth path, but on a shaky wooden bridge stretched over an abyss. In the cabin, panic hadn't yet set in, but anxiety was already moving between the rows, invisible as a shadow, but palpable as a chill down the spine. Flight attendants tried to maintain composure, though they themselves sensed something was terribly wrong with the plane. Oxygen masks dangled from the ceiling like yellow jellyfish, trembling along with the fuselage. A young mother watched her son, not understanding why he was crying harder than usual, as if sensing impending doom. Next to her sat a businessman, gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles were white. Further back, an elderly couple for whom this flight was supposed to be a routine trip home after visiting relatives. They didn't yet know that this journey would be nothing like they had dreamed. The first distinct wave of fear came with another vibrational jolt. The plane pitched its nose up so sharply that several people cried out. A suitcase fell from the overhead bin, hitting a man on the shoulder. Someone screamed. "What's happening? Why is the plane shaking so much?" No one knew the answer. In the cockpit, tension mounted as rapidly as in the cabin. Systems showed false data. The autopilot tried to take over, and immediately disengaged, unable to comprehend what was happening. And the airliner continued to rock, in huge, deep swells. "We have to break out of this cycle." The captain yanked the yoke, but the plane responded slowly, sluggishly, as if everything happening held no interest for it. "We won't break free," said Sasaki, as pale as the cockpit walls. "We have nothing to steer with." Damn it, how hard it was in such moments to remain the person responsible for hundreds of fates. But the captain, despite everything, refused to give in to panic. His breathing was heavy, but steady. He knew one thing: as long as they were alive, they had to fight. Even if the chances were slim. "I'm transmitting a distress signal," he exhaled. "We've lost control." The radio crackled to life with static, squawks, voices from another world that now seemed incredibly distant, almost unattainable. On the ground, they were listening, but didn't fully understand what was happening. Confusion erupted in air traffic control centers. How could a 747 lose all hydraulic systems? What did "no control" even mean? But the controllers were professionals too. They kept working. They tried to guide Flight 123 towards Haneda. The plane did try to hold its course. But it was drifting. The left side of the aircraft began to give way more than the right. There was a skew. And the more it grew, the more the plane tended to list sideways. The pilots managed to level it out each time only by a miracle, using engine thrust. Their only weapon. Outside, the mountains were already close, dangerously close. The airliner was flying over one of Japan's most picturesque regions, where mountain ranges rise to the sky like ancient guardians, where mist drifts through gorges as if concealing centuries of secrets. But now the mountains were not beautiful, they were a threat. They rose below, exuding something calm and eternal that utterly contradicted the panic engulfing the sky. "We're too low," Sasaki cried out. "I know." The captain lunged forward, adding more thrust, but the plane, as if exhausted from the struggle, began to drop again. It wasn't plummeting, it was settling, like a massive, wounded beast that hadn't quite fallen yet. Then, a miracle. It pitched its nose up again. Damn, this erratic up and down motion was driving them insane. Inside the cabin, fear was impossible to hide. Children were crying. Someone was praying. Someone else was trying to make a call on an old push-button phone in the armrest, even though the connection kept cutting out. A few people were scribbling notes with trembling hands, short, disjointed, but so incredibly vital. Notes that rescuers would eventually find, those who survived to read them. One woman clutched a teddy bear to her chest, her daughter's toy. The girl sat right beside her, watching her mother with wide, round eyes, and asked, "Are we going to fall?" And the mother replied, "No. No, honey. Everything's going to be okay. We're just a little scared. It'll pass soon." But her voice was trembling. And the little girl heard the tremor. And understood more than anyone realized. In the cockpit, the blare of emergency alarms had become the soundtrack of chaos. Beeps. Horns. Flashing red lights. Intense vibration. The captain was barely keeping the aircraft from a full stall and roll. He knew they were on the brink of disaster, but he kept fighting regardless. Then, suddenly, communication with the ground went dead. "Why did we lose comms?" Fukuda shouted. "We're in the mountains." "Radio interference," the captain roared. Then came another phugoid dip. The plane plunged downwards so violently that the people in the cabin cried out in unison, like a single organism. Below, a green wall of forest. Trees that threatened to pierce the plane's belly like ancient warrior spears. The captain revved the engines. And at the very last moment, in fate's final breath, the airliner lifted. By mere feet. It scraped over the treetops, leaving a roaring, trembling shadow in its wake. "It's still holding on," Sasaki rasped. "And it will hold on, as long as I'm breathing," the captain shouted, his voice like steel. But fate was preparing their next blow. Ahead, an even higher mountain loomed, immense, dark, massive. There wasn't enough thrust to climb over it in their current state. They tried. They pressed the levers. They pleaded with the machine to obey. It responded, but too little. Too late. "Hold on." The captain's final command before the plane plunged into a downward spiral. It was slow, but fatally certain. The gigantic Boeing 747, once the majestic king of the skies, had become an enormous bird that had lost the ability to fly. It still tried to lift its wings. It still tried to make its way home. But the sky no longer held it aloft. And everything around them, in the cabin, in the cockpit, in every heart, filled with the horror of anticipation. The final seconds were long. Endless. Crushing, like fate itself. The air around the plane grew thick, like tar. It gripped the wings, pressed down on the fuselage, pulled the aircraft down as if an invisible giant's hand had decided to deliver the final blow in this agonizing struggle. Yet the airliner fought back. It strained upwards. It pitched wildly. Its engines shrieked, like a living creature unwilling to die. But the mountains had already closed in around it. They rose, loomed, surrounded it from all sides, dark, mighty, cold. Their silhouettes in the twilight resembled fallen titans whose stony backs pierced the clouds. And Flight 123 now flew between them, as if in a vast stone maw, about to snap shut. Captain Takahama still gripped the yoke, though his hands were trembling. Not from fear, but from inhuman strain. His face was like marble. No trace of doubt, no flicker of weakness, only the fury of the fight and a desperate resolve to get his people home. But the plane moved as if the air had turned to stone. The wings vibrated, as if trying to lift against a force they couldn't overcome. "We won't make it," Sasaki gasped, looking at the rapidly growing peak ahead. "We will make it," the captain roared, defiant. "As long as I'm alive, we will make it." But fear still crept into the cockpit. It was quiet, like ghostly footsteps in an empty hall, yet its presence was felt with every nerve. They knew the struggle was reaching the point of no return. The plane began plummeting again. Another phugoid cycle. Nose down, fast, terrifying, with a dull roar of rushing air. In the cabin, people felt the descent with their entire bodies. The pressure slammed them into their seatbelts, into their seats, into the armrests. Someone screamed. Someone prayed again. Someone clutched a note, written with a trembling hand, to their chest. Someone tried to call anyone. Just to hear a familiar voice. The little girl, the one with the teddy bear, hugged her toy tightly, as if it were the only anchor in a sea of chaos. "Mommy," she whispered. "I'm scared." "It's okay, sweetie, it's okay," her mother's voice almost broke, but she held on. "We're together. We're okay. Everything will be fine." But tears already welled in her eyes, so silent, yet so loud in her soul. The plane lurched. Lunged upwards. Then down again. The cabin filled with a roar, so powerful it was as if the entire plane was groaning. People pressed their heads to their knees. Someone was gasping from fear. Oxygen was scarce. Pressure fluctuated wildly. One woman sobbed and said, "This is the end. We won't make it." But a man sitting nearby shouted, "No. As long as we're alive, this isn't the end. It's not over yet." And suddenly, a flash of hope. The plane began to climb again. Slowly. Stubbornly. As if gathering its last reserves of strength. The engines roared at maximum. Papers, napkins, small items trembled in the air from the vibrations. Holding it. Holding it, the captain growled. Seconds became an eternity. The plane's nose was still lower than it should have been, but it was climbing. It was fighting. For a moment, it seemed it would clear the peak. That the terrifying threshold would be crossed. That there was still a chance. And then, a fresh blow of fate. The tail pitched again. The roll began to steepen. The plane lurched so violently that the cabin filled with screams. The captain tried to compensate with thrust from the left engines, but they couldn't respond in time. The roll became wild. Relentless. Fatal. The plane began to descend right wing down, not fast, but inexorably. In the cockpit, the pilots shouted something in unison, no one heard the words. It was a single cry from the human soul, facing the limits of its endurance. The plane went into a wide, heavy turn. Trees drew closer. Then pulled back a little, only to approach even nearer. In the cabin, everyone heard a sound. A dull thud. Terrifying. It was like the rumble of distant thunder. Someone realized the treetops were scraping the fuselage. Someone didn't understand, but screamed in terror. The steel plates of the fuselage shrieked under the impact of branches. The cabin pitched more violently. People held on with their last strength, though there was almost nothing left to hold on to. And then, the decisive moment. The plane, like a massive beast losing its balance, tilted even more. Its right wing scythed through the treetops, as if a giant scythe had swept through the forest. Then again. Again. With each impact, the metal screamed. And then, a hit. A dull, terrifying, immense impact. The plane slammed sideways into the mountain slope. There was no fireball. No explosion like those often shown in movies. There was only a monstrous tearing sound of rending metal. The roar of the engines, which cut out instantly, like a severed nerve. And a dull thud that echoed through the gorges. The giant, king of the sky, collapsed into the heart of the mountain, like a broken titan, slowly, but irrevocably. The silence that followed was so deafening that it seemed the very earth held its breath. Night fell. The longest night in the lives of those who survived. Only 4 remained alive. 4 among hundreds. They lay in piles of twisted metal, amidst fragments of seats, amidst a silence broken only by the creaking of the cooling fuselage and the whisper of the wind passing between the trees. One woman, still conscious, heard someone groaning nearby. Someone else called for help. Someone cried. Someone tried to crawl out. But with each passing minute, these voices grew softer, weaker, rarer. She screamed, called for rescuers, though she knew perfectly well that all around were mountains, remote, empty, dark. She called. She fought. She lived. The night stretched on like an eternity. Only by dawn had the voices around almost faded away. And when the rescuers finally arrived, after long, agonizing hours, 4 were pulled from the wreckage. Only 4. But each of them was a miracle. Each was the voice of the hundreds who could not return home. Each carried memory, pain, a story that must not be forgotten. Flight 123 never returned to Osaka. It never returned to Haneda. It never returned home. But its memory lives on. It lives in hearts. In films. In books. In eyewitness accounts. In the bitterness of those who lost loved ones. And in the courage of those who fought to the end, in the cockpit, in the cabin, in the mountains. It was a tragedy. But it was also a story of incredible human resilience. A story that will forever remain in the skies over Japan. A story the wind repeats every time it passes over those mountains. A story that tells us all. Cherish life. It is fragile. It is precious. It is beautiful. And sometimes, just one breath separates us from eternity.